right, my teacher friends, Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. And if you are looking to reclaim your evenings and weekends, and if you are looking for a better way to grade papers apart from the traditional grading paradigm, you're in the right place, because today I'm going to show you one of my favorite alternative grading methods. It's called Shark Tank. And before I dive into this, I need to kind of preface it this way. This is very difficult to explain if you're not familiar with my heuristics. So if this is your first orientation to me, spend a little time in my YouTube channel. Just like pick some arbitrary writing workshop that may be applicable to your instruction and give it a whirl, give it a play, and see what I mean by heuristics, because there's a fundamental difference between templates and heuristics. And I'm going to be using some jargon imbued language here that's completely germane to my heuristics, and it won't make sense if you don't have familiarity. I'm going to speak in a way that kind of suggests it's your first exposure to me. So hopefully you can figure it out. In the meantime, before we dive in, please subscribe to the new channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, spread the good news far and wide, because our subscription rate is going way up. It's pretty cool. So we're met with a lot of success so far. So this is why I do alternative grading methods. So ever since the one-room schoolhouse, students write, teacher collects papers, teacher begrudgingly gives up evenings and weekends and pours oceans of red ink on the paper. And early in my career, I kind of had this eureka epiphany moment. I said, dude, what is going on, man? Like, I did not sign a contract in which it was stipulated that I must agree to massive amounts of compulsory unpaid overtime. And I did not sign a contract that said I needed to give up my weekends and evenings just solely for the task of grading my students' essays. So I thunked up a whole other paradigm. And here's what's going on, right? I asked myself, who's doing the heavy lifting? And I did my my mentorship with Theodore Sizer. Some of you might know him from, he's kind of the think tank behind School Without Walls. So I did my graduate work at Brown. And he always said, students must carry more of the onus than the teacher if learning is truly going to happen. And I remember early in my practicums, I said, Ted, I was like, this grading paradigm is nonsense. We're doing 99% of the heavy lifting. All kids need to do is read our comments and look at the grade and say, oh, I love Mr. Kuhn. He gave me a 98, or I hate that Mr. Kuhn. He gave me a 72, right? And that's pretty much their only engagement with all that effort that we put into grading and scoring their papers, commenting, editing, etc. So alternative grading methods really shifts the onus back onto the kids, so that at bare minimum, it's 50-50. And most of my alternative grading methods are actually about 75% on the student, 25% on the teacher. So another thing too that I have found in the traditional grading paradigm is that no matter how much red ink I manage to squeeze into the margins of a student's paper, it does not facilitate their growth and maturation as a writer. I'm talking, I could put an ocean of red ink in that margin. To what effect, right? I think it's kind of a futile exercise, and it's not the most effective strategy to get kids to really flourish and take off in their writing. The other thing that I see as a problem or a roadblock to the traditional grading paradigm is that teachers are the only ones who see the writing. And I call that the covetous lords of composition, right? We covet over the work of the student, and students don't see each other's work. In alternative grading methods, you see more, be more. Students are going to see so much writing that, and it's my belief that the more writing you see, the better you become. So they're going to see the good, the bad, the ugly of their own writing, but also of their peers. So let's talk about Shark Tank real quick and how this alternative grading method works. So what I do is I like to have at least 5 students volunteer to submit their paper to whole class review. I usually incentivize it and I say, if you anonymously submit your work, I'll give you an extra 10 points to your essay. And I usually get 5 takers for that. In fact, I usually get more. And the AP kids really like the alternative grading methods, and they're not shy and bashful about sharing their work, right? My on-level Regents kids have a little more trepidation about this. So I get like 5 students to volunteer their essays, and I tag like 10 extra points to it. And just like Shark Tank, we have judges. And per round, we have 5 student judges plus me to kind of facilitate it. And just like Shark Tank, we start with $100. Each essay starts with $100. And what we do is the students will break down each part of the heuristic. So everything from the introductions to the syllogistic body paragraphs, first premises, sentence constructs, tier 2 level vocabulary, grammar, punctuation, syntax, all that stuff. And we basically award it a money value, all right? Each component of the heuristic. So I'll model this for you with looking at like 3 or 4 introductory paragraphs for an essay that we did. And we grade in my school on a 50 to 100 scale, even in the AP courses. So if I slap a 5 on an AP essay, I got to figure out a numeric value for that. And, it's like 88 to 92. And I got to put that number in the grade book. So the money value here actually is pretty cool in terms of grading papers. And then the judges award money increments in series of 5. So you have 100, 95, 90, 85, 80 on down. So the judges are the ones that critique the paper. But if they hold up, let's say, an 85, and we're looking at the introduction, and they say the introduction's headed towards an 85, it's not just a number value. They have to articulate why. Why is it an 85? Why are they deducting points? And this is cool because students are assuming my role. They're taking authorship of my role as the teacher. And they're teaching the whole class, the elements of composition. It's very, very neat to see. So what I do after each paper is I switch out the judges. I replace 5 and bring in 5. And this way I have a talking quota for the activity. And I tell students, when you're in the Shark Tank, you got to contribute at least 3 times, because I know that I have my shy, my reticent, reluctant participants in class. In this way, I'm sharing the onus as well in that manner. So the grades, right, have to articulate a why reason. So if you give 100, why? 95, why? 85, why? And again, we do all aspects of the heuristic. So along the lines of grammar, punctuation, syntax, a student might get a $75 value because they have a lot of errors, comma splices, things of that nature. We grade the sentence constructs. We grade first premise, second premise, embedded quotes, whatever you want to focus on. Every little wrinkle that you want to focus on can be analyzed in the Shark Tank. But I've already alluded to this. The kicker is you got to use heuristics. The students have to have a shared language. And when I push into districts and I observe peer edits, oftentimes peer edits don't work because the kids don't have the language, which takes me to this, right? The big kicker, the big come to Jesus. You got to Bob Ross your instructions. So in order to, I'm going to show you some student exemplars in just a second. In order to get my kids to write at the caliber that you're going to see, I had to get to my proverbial canvas and easel and paint countless papers with them in order to produce what you're going to see. I call that Bob Rossing my instruction because just like Bob Ross, I'm using heuristics. He used the heuristic of the wet on wet technique every single time he did a natural landscape. And my students are either going to declare or invert the thesis in the introductory paragraph. And then every single expository mode, every body paragraph, we proceed syllogistically. So let me show you one Shark Tank alternative grading method real quick that I did just recently, right before the Christmas break, using a letter from Einstein to his daughter Lysol in my AP language class. And what I'll do is just show you a couple of introductory paragraphs and how we Shark Tank introductions, and I'll run through it. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is this. So, how do I write the intro? And we know, since we're doing rhetorical analysis, that we're going to have to use the declarative thesis heuristic. Well, what does that mean? Well, I got some top secret news for you, and I know some of you are familiar with how I unpack prompts. If you go back to antiquity with the AP language exam, implicit in the prompt of every FRQ2 are two questions. How does the author construct meaning? And what is the author's intent? So when I ask what is the author's intent, I know some teachers use exigence, universal theme, universal truth. I say author's intent. And it's going to be a 4-sentence move. My introductory paragraphs are always 4 sentences long. And what my students do is they take 3 sentences to answer the first question. How does the author construct meaning, right? And this is why we call it declarative, because when you answer the question, how does the author construct meaning, you're basically getting at a thesis statement. That question, the answer to that question is the thesis statement. So I have my students take 3 sentences to do that. And what they're going to do is drop some terms, devices, techniques. And what's going to happen is you'll see that my students use a variety of terms, devices, and techniques to get to the construction of meaning, right? Because syntax alone does not construct meaning, right? Tone alone does not construct meaning. The pieces, right? The terms, the devices, techniques, they jigsaw piece with each other and connect and interlink. So let's look at this graphically and break down everything that goes into the declarative thesis. So the first 3 sentences are going to be, how does the author construct meaning? So you're going to begin with the thesis. You're going to sprinkle in a little bit of background and context without being plot summative. We have to remember that we're writing rhetorical analysis, not plot analysis. So we don't want any support. We don't want any analysis in there, just hardcore rhetorical analysis. Now, here's things that we're going to evaluate in the Shark Tank. Tier 2 level vocabulary. So I run intensive word study academies with my students throughout the academic year. So for context, I got my kids the day after Labor Day, and we did this Shark Tank the week before Christmas break. So they've had a few months with me. So pay attention to their vocabulary. What we're looking for is some nice SAT level caliber words. That's what I mean by tier 2. And it's an academic paper, so they need to sound academic without sounding contrived, pretentious, out of their wheelhouse. They have to own the words. Sentence constructs is something else that I work on a lot with my student. And I know some of you are familiar with my work. I run a nuance academy, and one staple component is this. My students study exhaustively Strunken White's book called Write It Right. And in that book, they have something called rule number 18, which espouses the idea that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So I hope at this stage of the year that my kids are syntactical ninjas. In my YouTube channel, I have videos also for the 20-sentence patterns. So check that out with your students. So there's 12 different sentence types, but the types can be patterned 20 different ways. So also at this stage of the game, I've hammered my kids with grammar, punctuation, and syntax, so they're not making a lot of errors. They can wield semicolons, colons, dashes, commas, periods, and they're not screwing that stuff up by and large, the kids that have paid attention. So we're kind of cooking in peanut sauce at the moment. We're doing pretty good. So let's recap before we take a look at the first exemplars. 3 plus 1. 3, how does the author construct meaning? 1, what is the author's intent, for a total of 4 sentences. All right, let's dive right in. Declarative, thesis, student exemplars. So let's take a look at number 1. I'll read it and then I'll unpack it with you. In a letter to his daughter, one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the world provided a groundbreaking thesis. Love, above all else, is the driving force of the universe. As such, a renowned scientist, Einstein feared that his shockingly uncomplicated yet also revolutionary postulation would be viewed with ridicule. However, Einstein's precisely manipulated syntax allows him to formulate a cogent argument. Through his expert use of logic, Einstein successfully crafts a solid basis for his idea. In a battle of abstractions, he gives himself rational ground to stand on. So here's what my students do, the 5 judges. I facilitate it. I'm kind of like the head shark tanker. And we talk about the need to teeter-totter balance the explicit and the implicit statement of the terms, devices, techniques. I want that teeter-totter balance because when we get to the first premise, you also need to state terms, devices, techniques. So if you explicitly state the term in the intro, you imply it in the first premise and vice versa, right? So it's a really neat balance because you don't want to get that out of kilter. So let's take the first sentence. In a letter to his daughter, one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the world provided a groundbreaking thesis. Love, above all else, is the driving force of the universe. So my students, when we did this the other day, said that's the logos, that's the statement of the exigence, that's the universal truth, that's the universal theme. But man, oh man, look at that sentence construct. Woo! That's advanced kind of stuff, right? So that's some really good cooking right there. So out of the gate, they're strong. As such, a renowned scientist, Einstein, feared that his shockingly uncomplicated yet also revolutionary postulation would be viewed with ridicule. That's the ethos. So since it's implied there, when we get to the first premise, the student is going to explicitly state it, right? So you oscillate back and forth. So we have logos, exigence, ethos. However, Einstein's precisely manipulated syntax. So the kid explicitly stated there, syntax. So you can see we got 3 construction of meaning, right? And then we just end it with this final sentence here. Einstein successfully crafts a solid basis for his idea. In a battle of abstractions, he gives himself rational ground to stand on. So a little bit more logos there, and the universal theme, the universal truth. Exactly 4 sentences long. So during the Shark Tank, my students noted that this kid has some super good voice rhythm and flow, right? At sentence level, he's a syntactical ninja. They were like, wow, that's really impressive. This looks like what Mr. Kuhn does, right? So this is honestly one of the best writers I've had in 22 years of teaching. This kid can flat out write. So I was glad that he volunteered to submit his because I want my students seeing good writing. They noted that the vocab is up there as well. Good words, like cogent, abstractions, what else is it? Ridicule, revolutionary. So groundbreaking, renowned, really, really, really good tier 2. But the kid owns it, right? It doesn't sound forced. It doesn't sound contrived. He owns all of these words. So as we're talking about this, at the end of the introduction, after all 5 students have spoken and I've chimed in, we are awarded a money value. And uniformly across the board, we said, ka-ching, $100 bill, $100 bill, $100 bill. This is pie in the sky kind of stuff. So we all said $100 bill. So that set the standard for us. Then we go to number 2. And you might be asking yourself, Kristian, how many kids do you have in your class? So in my AP language classes, I have 31 and 26. And you might be asking yourselves, well, what do the other kids do that aren't in the Shark Tank? Here's what they're doing. They are comparing their introductions to the ones that we're evaluating, and they're going to score themselves. So during the writing workshop, during the Shark Tank, my students are writing in their margins to me. And this is one of the things I don't like about the traditional grading paradigm. It's a one-sided conversation. It's me saying everything. It's you saying everything. Kids need to have a voice. So when they submit their papers, they're going to say things like this. Based on the 4 exemplars that were in the Shark Tank, my introduction looks most like the 85 because. Here's what I need to prove on. Here's what I'm doing well. This is my plan of execution for the next revision. Beautiful. And then when I read it over, I either agree with them, I disagree with them, or I say, hey, there's one thing you overlooked. Let's check this out. So let's see number 2 and how we would score this in the Shark Tank. Written in a letter to his daughter, Einstein, arguably the most influential mind of all time, exerts a theory in which he believes to be the answer to one of history's most pressing inquiries. Love, the all-being force which wields enough power to provide the world with salvation, is proclaimed by Einstein to be a universal force in which unifies and reforms humanity. He emphasizes and reiterates the astounding, vast capabilities of love throughout the universe, declaring that it is an energy so vigorous that it cannot be replicated. Worried that humanity will respond to his discovery, he beseeched upon his daughter to keep his words secret until the world is ready to receive information that will ultimately alter the mind of humankind. Let me skip ahead here. My students graded this. It's kind of split between 80 and 85. There's a drop off in this one in comparison to the first. Let me unpack why and what my students identified. And again, it's not me driving the discussion. My students found this on their own. So the 5 judges noted that sentence 1 is long. Sentence 2 is long. Sentence 3 is long. Sentence 4 is long. The syntax is running too parallel, and it has a very choppy, sort of monotonous read. Lots of run-on sentences, too much fat on the bone. So they said to this student who wrote this, and again, it's anonymous, they said, hit me with an independent clause somewhere. So like your thesis statement needs to be more declarative because you're writing a declarative thesis. And this is too droning. It goes on too long. In terms of the syntax, we've studied all the patterns and the types, and the 5 judges in the Shark Tank said, it sounds like you're trying too hard. You're thinking too deliberately about, oh, I need to use pattern 14 number here, right? And it's like, no, just right. Like, don't get thinking that way. And then along lines of tier 2, everybody noticed this. He beseeched upon, and they're like, that word doesn't fit, right? You're not using it right. So I love to see my students experimenting with their vocabulary, but they have to stay in their wheelhouse and use words correctly. So in terms of money value, what we said was probably 80, 85, somewhere around there. And then what students do in the peanut gallery that are not in the Shark Tank, the ones that don't have their introductions projected onto the overhead, they pass their computers around to people that are at their stations. So I usually group students in a quad of 4. And then what they do is they get peer feedback, and the peers will say, I think you're headed towards a 90, and here's the reason why. They pass it to the next kid in the quad. Yeah, I agree, a 90 is right because, right? And you go about it that way. So let me show you one more just to really solidify this. Again, I'll read it and then I'll unpack it with you. One of society's most brilliant scientists, Einstein, made a startling comparison in a letter to his daughter of two things you wouldn't consider related: science and love. Right? So, again, this student's starting with the exigence, the logos. So, they implied it. Enumerating. So, now we're explicitly stating the syntax. Enumerating love's eternal power. His findings describe how it is the most powerful tool we can use to make a change, which is what the world needs. At the time it was written, theory would be considered groundbreaking, and Einstein feared that its significance and importance would not yet be appreciated for its true meaning. As a result, Einstein made a simple request of his daughter: publish his work after an appropriate period of time in which his findings would be properly understood. So, is it as good as the first one? No. Is it better than the second one? Yes. So, what dollar value are we going to give it? What my students found with this one is they thought the tier 2 was lagging at times. So, there's some dips in it in comparison to number 1. There's also some sloppy sentence constructs. I think it's sentence 2 or 3 was missing a word, and it kind of broke flow. It broke the rhythm a little bit. In terms of its syntax, it's good. Everything's varied, and that's what we want: supple, flowing, but not quite as good as exemplar number 1. So, ta-da! This is what we said. We scored it a 90, right? And that was that, So we do probably about, anywhere from 3, 4, 5 introductions, and it gives students a good sense of where they stand with regards to their own writing. And further, what happens is, students begin the conversation with me about their writing. So here's the kicker, right? In order for this to work, you need to know thy heuristics. When you get into the body paragraphs, my students are expert at the syllogistic method because it's the only heuristic we use for every single FRQ. So in this class, I'm specifically focusing on AP language. And FRQ1 for synthesis, we write our body paragraph syllogistically. When we get to FRQ2, rhetorical analysis, we write our body paragraph syllogistically. For FRQ3, which is the argument-based question, we write our body paragraph syllogistically. So my guys are really well versed in this, and we just run through the whole gamut. And you may be asking yourself, how much time does this take? So I'm on a block schedule, and we have 86 minutes per block. And I was able to get through an entire essay with my students in about 70 minutes. Here's the thing: it's the holiday season. My students are leaving school with no work because I believe recesses are for recess. I don't want them to think about my class for an entire week. They need a break. They need to recharge their batteries. Myself am burnt out. I'm tired. I'm leaving here without any work because all of these essays are graded. At the end of the exercise, at the end of the Shark Tank, I have my students do something crucial. I say, in exactly 5 sentences, tell me what grade you deserve and why. Here's the kicker: if we are within 5 points of each other, I'll give them the higher score. Before the Shark Tank, I read their essays, and on a sheet of notebook paper, I wrote down just the grade I think it deserves. I did not leave them any comment. I did not leave them any feedback. To get through a class stack took me like a half hour to read them. No big deal. A lot quicker than loading the paper with comments. Then I read all their margin notes from the Shark Tank. I read that 5-sentence reflection. And then the last thing they do, which is perhaps the most important, is this. I say, write down 3 learning targets. What are the 3 things you need to focus on most in order to proceed further with revision or the next subsequent essay? And I'll end with this. You folks that are looking at my work for the first time, or you're not that familiar with my work, my YouTube channel is loaded with writing workshops. Familiarize yourself with the heuristics, and then it opens the gate for these alternative grading methods, and you can have a field day with it. All right, I'm going to sign off. That's it from here. I'm going to make more videos with my alternative grading methods. If you have any questions, drop me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Also note that I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. We run a series of professional developments throughout the calendar year. Some are free. I'll amend that. Most are free. Some are for a nominal fee. I do webinars and workshops on my alternative grading methods. I have one scheduled with Perfection Learning in the coming weeks, and you can see my calendar at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. And I present these with NWP Perfection Learning. I've done some presentations with NCTE as well. So I got a whole bunch of tricks in my bag. And then as far as students, if you want to work with me, I have my own tutoring business called Write at Ivy Write. I'm an Ivy League graduate, really expert on the college personal statement. So when you get to that point in your career, if you want some expert eyes and some expert guidance, drop me an email and we could talk about getting you on my roster. And I also can get you over the AP Lang and AP Lit humps. So I've been teaching both those courses for over 2 decades. All right, that's it from here. I'll continue to put some more alternative grading methods up into the channel. Please subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues to follow along. That's it from here. Take care.